Recording in progress.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight. I'm here with you again for the intersection between psychology and culture. And one of the things that we come back to on here is trauma, recovery from trauma, healing from trauma. And I have a wonderful guest today with some wonderful perspective on going through healing and recovery and how we can find that some of the things that actually even do us well in life can turn out to be involved with the way that we cope with trauma and how complicated the relationship with those things can be. I'm really privileged today to be able to meet with Lena Fein, who's the author of the recent memoir, Shattering the Mirror. Lena, thank you for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you.
I was able to get a copy and to read a copy of your book and your memoir. I was just saying this as we were setting up. I get a lot of these kinds of books and messages through the podcast that I get to read about people's journeys and experiences. And one of the things that I always find fascinating is the way that people find, yes, there's a flow, a narrative flow that gets to like, here's a culmination of, and here's the high points of development and healing. But I always find it super valuable when someone is able to give us that feeling of kind of ongoing evolution, that it isn't like, hey, well, this is hard and now I'm good, because that's not really how life works. And that really struck me that you do a great job of giving us that message. And as I'm reading that, I'm feeling like I'm moving through a life with ups and downs and ups and downs. And I wasn't left with any pressure at the end to think that I couldn't say that's still there, although you've made some tremendous growth and healing. And does that make sense? That kind of balance? Yeah.
Yes. Because it's not like, wow, I woke up and everything was glorious. It was
I'm at stage 5 healing now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll use stage 1ers by my book. No, it didn't feel that way at all. It just felt.
All I can say is that it's a journey, and I can honestly say there were so many things that happened on that journey to wholeness and being more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not perfect, but I'm so much more available to life because I'm not kind of hiding or doing all my coping strategies. So,
well, one of the main things about the book is how high achievement can actually become a coping strategy, and how complicated that can be because it can mask behavior that people look and say, oh, that's cool. It can really mask the pain that you're going through.
Yes.
And you tell the story in such a way that is very, very open. It's very, very open about the experiences that you had of trauma, of abuse and neglect. And maybe you tell people a little bit about how was it you decided to tell this story in such an open, raw kind of memoir format?
That's such a good question because I was actually terrified to be open and raw. But I really feared shame. I never thought I'd write my story, let alone read it out loud, let alone publish it. And I could honestly say that process of being absolutely terrified and working through it by putting my actual real raw words on the page, that was a gift. That ended up being a gift to get me back into who I really was. So I think what helped with my writing was that at a very young age, I want to say 18 months, I realized I had a photographic memory. Basically, whatever happened on that day, I would not only remember the visuals, I'd remember the feeling state, I'd remember the audio. So when I went back finally into my memory banks, the recording was there. It just was kind of hidden and it all came to the surface. And I was able, as a mature adult woman, to, instead of having a 2-year-old perspective. Mm-hmm. So that helped me in a sense, because obviously when we're little, something happens and we make up a story about what should happen. And then you develop these patterns.
That's fascinating. So with the when people think about this, about trauma being like, troublesome memories, traumatic memories, and then also I think a lot of people are aware of the emotional memory, the physiological and mental feelings that come up that were the feelings at the time. But you're describing a whole new aspect here, which is the thing I thought when I was 5 is still just as real and vibrant as maybe even more than the part of me now that's like, well, that's not true.
Yeah, it was real and vibrant, but then I'd had to go and look at it like, oh, what does that mean for me in my 60s? Not from the perspective of a 2-year-old. So it's just interesting. So I want to say that I was my feeling state of when I was, let's say, 17 months old. And I remember that day because that's when my mom usually came to pick me up from the crib. But on this particular day, it was my grandmother who had an old face. And like, I was really scared. Where's my mom? And she said, your mom is having her baby today. And she put me in a new dress and we went to the hospital and I got to meet my new baby sister. My mom had like 4 girls in 5 years. So we had a lot of little girls going around. Anyway, I remember my sense of joy on that day. And I'd say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, even though my mother was relentlessly cleaning the house. I mean, she had a lot of girls and we were left to kind of play by ourselves and we all sort of got in accidents. We had one accident after another because we were playing by ourselves. I think I still remember it as kind of a happy time in my soul, like my little girl self. Everything is funny, and somewhere around first or second grade, maybe it was kindergarten, I loved to write. I mean, I was good in school from a very young age. I would write poems. And I will say that I had joy. And I think I was in second grade where I had my first crush on a boy. And I got a diary from the Five and Dime. Those are the days where you can walk with your 25 cents anywhere you wanted and make it home. And I talked all about my first crush on like the second grader who had the coolest corduroy pants or something like that. And I hid it under my mattress and I was so proud of myself. And the next day when I came home from school on the bus, my mom was holding my diary at the door saying, how dare you? No normal child would write such things. I mean, I just wrote that he had really cute pants. Anyway, I was mortified. All of a sudden, I was so proud of my words, and now I was shamed. I remember I went into my room and cried.
No.
And then when my dad came home from work, my mother read the diary out loud in front of my 3 sisters and me again as I'm sobbing on the floor. And I was so sure my dad was going to rescue me and say, it's not okay. But Dad, diaries are supposed to be private. Anyway,
Yeah.
that event it wasn't safe for me to say my true feelings and that set up a thing in my belief system was I'm never going to write a story about myself again. It's not safe. I'm ashamed. That was my first feeling of shame. And I decided then and there, but I could do well in school. I just don't have to write a diary. I'm going to get A's in reading and writing and arithmetic or very goods or whatever we got back then. That decision I made, I was a very good student and I did well and went to good colleges. And then I had a really good job that paid well. But it's such a young age to like feel shame. Mm-hmm. Like the true feminine, all this was shut down and I didn't really know it because I was so proud of myself for being able to do well in school.
Yeah.
And it sounds good. I got accolades, but I had shut off my tender, yearning heart, I guess. So it was a young age. And I remember that decision that I made of hopelessness, that it's not safe to write my story. That's why for me, actually writing and putting it out there was very scary. And I thought my worst fear that I'd be shamed, and that hasn't happened.
So that persists. It's interesting how these things cast a shadow that you
Yeah.
obviously are past it to the point where you did
Yeah.
it, but it's
Yeah.
not without echoes of that feeling or that same feeling.
And it wasn't, I set up the pattern, and it wasn't until my mom died when I was 51. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and died within a week and a half of that diagnosis.
Mm.
When the last couple of days when she was in the hospital, she was intubated, so she was like kind of on breathing machine, and but I had never seen her eyes. She couldn't talk, but her eyes were like glowing in a way that I've never seen before. I felt how my body felt was, oh my gosh, my mother, there's a kind soul in there. And she's making an amends from her deathbed without using her voice. I took it in. It didn't like change me overnight, but it started me on the path of, oh, this is what it feels like to have a heart. This is what it feels to recognize somebody else's heart and have it reflect my heart. It was a life-changing moment. It wasn't to say that everything got all the mirror didn't shatter overnight, but it started me on a path of, maybe I don't want to be in high tech anymore. Maybe I'm going to learn how to sing. Maybe I'm going to learn how to dance. And so I started to explore those other parts of me that had been shut down in service to being a good student or a good worker. So that's like the journey in a nutshell. And there's lots of trap doors and all sorts of things on the way to the.
Well,
Just,
as you mentioned that, one of the threads that really ran throughout is different versions of the phrase that I kept seeing is that after something would happen, and a lot of this was very moving goalposts of like, oh, this is not okay now. That's not okay now. This normal thing you did, that's also not okay now. And whenever something like that seemed to come up, there was this phrase that kept saying is, I swear I would never again, like fill in the blank. I would never fail at this again. I would never bring home this kind of grade again. I would never do this mistake again. I just saw that was a repetition in your experience. And I'm sure the way that you were communicating with yourself about how to handle things.
I think what I developed is something, it was a form of a shield, but I didn't know it at the time. I need to be the one here that needs to make everything okay. Like whether it's getting an A or school or really being hyper vigilant. I don't like to be late, really accepting the burden of make sure everybody is okay. And that sounds worthy, but it was kind of a manic way. In a way, I was kind of running ahead to fix things and leaving myself behind.
Yeah, I think that the way we cope with things, it seems to me, is often a reflection of something that we do, and it's hard to sort out, but it can even be something that we don't really want to give up completely. It can be something that it's like, well, maybe I do actually feel good about caring for other people. Maybe I'm the kind of person who is good at making things happen and achieving and problem solving. But it's the amplification of that or the purposes for it, I think, that can get problematic, right?
Yeah, and I didn't realize it at the time, but very early on, in my book, when I was 2.5, and I remember my mom was on the phone in the kitchen. She had a little baby sleeping on the couch, and I was playing with my older sister who was 14 months older than me. And we were playing blocks. And on this day, like no other day, I was, I guess, being 2.5, and I didn't want to give her my block. And I just kept holding on to it really tight. And my sister wasn't used to that behavior at all. I always gave her whatever she wanted. But on this day, I didn't. I was holding it so hard, and she was so mad that she remembers it. See, I ended up hurling you towards the window like a football. In a second, you know, I was flying, which was, I remember still viscerally the feeling of terror of going fast and not being able to stop it. The last second I recognized drapes and I grabbed them. I don't remember anything. The next memory is I'm sitting on the floor and my mom comes at me with a dish towel and puts it on my face and said, "Don't let go of the towel." So this hyper vigilant thing, I remember singing, there was no words that would come out of my mouth. Now I had a photographic memory. I I'll just give away the story. My nose was severed by the glass. My mother, I was holding
Yeah,
my
I was reading
own
that. I
nose,
was like, oh my God.
and I don't recall blood. I don't recall pain. I just recall this hyper vigilant, don't let go of the towel. Don't look. I was singing a little song in my head. As she put me in the car, she put my sister in the car, she drove off, slammed on the brakes because she forgot the baby at home. Anyway, you could imagine that scene. And I still remember the doctor's face in introducing himself to me. So I remember that. I remember his name. Don't remember blood or pain. But my mother said, you were such a good girl. You held still when the doctor sewed your nose back on. I had no idea that my nose was severed. But, that's what the body does. It blocks out that.
Yeah.
But that, when I look back on that accident, there was another coping mechanism. It's like, oh my gosh, if you don't give somebody what you want, you're going to die.
You're going to lose your nose.
If they
Holy
want your
cow.
block,
Yeah.
here, take the block. You want some money here, take the money. This hyper vigilance about doing it right, because if you don't, someone's going to get hurt around here. That nervous system response, I didn't realize that really for most of my life, I probably wasn't breathing fully. It's like kind of panic. And I feel that, yes, there was a lot of emotional things that went on, but there was also that key traumatic event when I was really young that my whole nervous system developed around everybody needs to be safe. I need to run ahead of the Grim Reaper. I was always early for the party. So it's just,
one of the things that hit me particularly about that story, and you have a few examples of this in the book, is that it reminded me of what I hear from people when they go through trauma, particularly abuse, neglect. One of the things that can be very complicated is that things happen that are contrary to that. So, I mean, for example, with this story, your mom was very worried about you. She gets you to the hospital. She tells you good job, that kind of a thing. That is not representative of all the experiences you had with your mother when you did something, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And so to have these things kind of sprinkled in, that are like this behavior, that behavior, this behavior, for many people that can make it feel very complicated, because how do I feel about what's going on? Is that the case for your experience?
Yeah, and you're trying to, like, my brain and heart were trying to make sense of it. So I became in some ways hypervigilant, anxious. I was afraid of being shamed because my nose was misshapen. My mom criticized me for the way I looked, the way I moved. They didn't talk about it back then, but I had a head injury, obviously, with the break in the nose. And I didn't find out till years later in my 50s when I got in a car accident and had a concussion. And my brain, they said, actually, your earliest trauma was at 2.5 when you hit the window, in addition to your nose, that I was only in the 9th percentile for eye-hand coordination. So there was all these things that where I felt like I didn't put together until I was later, that I was like, I was so hard on myself for being uncoordinated, like feeling like there's something wrong with me. And I can say as an adult, oh, here's poor kid. She had a brain injury. She didn't know it. And she compensated the best she could. And she could never really catch a ball because it would go by her before she went to get it. So it was a combination of things. And I think our journey in life is to have that exam in life where we start really looking back in our memory banks and putting together the breadcrumbs and say, oh, the meaning of I made of that when I was 3 is different than the meaning that I'd make of it at 20 or 30. And the process of writing that book, I realized my memoir, by doing that, it was forcing me to relook at things that I had formed a belief around that really wasn't true anymore. So that's why it was hard, and it was hard to read it out loud. I did an audible version. It was the guy was 30 something, my son's age, who didn't want to read my memoir. I was terrified of reading out loud to him, but he never shamed me once. So even that, I'm reading the story out loud to a male who's in his 30s and he's nothing but kind. Take three, take four, it's all good. Like he was great. That was a huge healing moment. And I can say now the process to unwind all this wasn't just a straight line. So the actual journey, I was getting healing by writing and then women reading it and not shaming me. It was like a miracle. It was like, what a gift to myself. I didn't think it would be, but it was. And a gift to other women that recognize maybe, what it's an older age group of women, because I think our parents grew up in the World War II depression and they had their own trauma, immigrating from somewhere, not having enough money, working two jobs, all that. That was our parents. So, my mom was the only child. Maybe she just didn't have the tools. So I could forgive her. It wasn't fun when she was being abusive, but that was the tool she had.
Did you feel like that was the version then of her, I would say maybe inability to cope in a way that was emotionally regulated? It was, I got the tone of that there was a lot of just maybe sorrow and resentment about life. And unfortunately, she was taking that out on you all.
Really, yeah, physically and emotionally. And the one of the things where I first got a glimpse of my mother was I was in San Francisco. I was like a senior in high school, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was playing in San Francisco. I had never heard of it. I saw it with a friend. And when I saw Nurse Ratched, she was like in the psychiatric ward. She was so nice to the public, but boy, to the mental patients, she was abusive behind closed doors. And when I saw that, that's reminded me of my mother, and I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed because I realized, oh, that's my mother. She does the abuse behind closed doors.
And that creates a certain expectation then of what happens when there's a big inconsistency. One of the things that I stood out to me, and you had mentioned this around a story where there was the physical violence where she'd struck you, that in that time you realized that the rules were different. She was allowed to strike you and treat you certain ways, but you were certainly not allowed to do that to her or anyone else.
Or my sisters, right?
Right.
And so, and the abuse was, I have a chapter in there when I was in high school, and I just loved, it was a summer class in ecology of the area, and we'd go on field trips, and I had plants and did plant presses and microscopes. And I remember putting together my final report, which was pressed plants. And my mother, because I was making a mess on the table, she literally like swooped all my pressed plants and they all just disintegrated in her hands. And I just remember being so brokenhearted. And, the next day I go to school and my friend had called other people and they all donated a few samples of their plants so I could turn in my report. But that was just cruelty. I was getting A's in schools. I put everything into my classes because I loved plants. And so the things that she did were just so cruel and unregulated. They always happened when I was the only one home with her, or my sisters were doing something else. We compared notes later after she died that I thought it was just me getting abused, but my sisters were too. It just happened when you were alone. It was like Nurse Ratched. She got that patient alone. She's going to go to town. And it was awful. And I came to the place where as she was dying, I think it was some forgiveness opened up there. And I'm really glad I put my story to the page because it was a lot of energy, and it took all of that, was a 10-year journey to write, a long journey to publish, but I needed to kind of be in that soup of, it was really a rough soup, but at the end of the day, I could honestly say, wow, I'm glad I did it because the book, like my story isn't a burden anymore. Like I faced it, I released it, and I feel like I'm living from who I really am. So I'm glad I didn't missed the memo before I left the planet. I'm really glad that I got to feel what it's like to be really alive without all the different shields that I created to try and be safe, but it was really false safety.
There's a one passage that I really, really got a lot out of. It was one, and it struck me as very empowering. You mentioned, if I can read a quote
Yeah.
here for everybody.
Yeah.
There was no escape. I was trapped in a dark cellar of terror and shame. At the time, I believed that only my mother held the key to letting me out. I didn't realize that I'd swallowed it. And I wanted to ask you about that, of what that
Yeah.
represented to you, that concept of the key and swallowing and the cellar.
The key, the concept, and it's such an important one, was when my mother read my diary, and those diaries had little keys, even though you can break into them, but they had those little keys. I just remember, I didn't have that diary very long, pouring my heart out in a way that only like maybe someone who's 8 or 7 or 8 can. It wasn't really big words. It's like, I really liked his red corduroys or whatever it was, or his red pants. I felt so much love as I was writing that, and so proud of myself that when the next day my mother read it out loud twice, and that my dad didn't do anything and I was sobbing on the floor, I just have the visceral memory of me crawling into bed and giving up. Just like I said, like I swallowed that key to my heart. I didn't really know that that's what I was doing, but that's what I did. And it took me making lots of messes to find that key and realize it's okay that it's messy, but you got to keep your heart in the game. Otherwise, you're not going to get the growth from the mess, right? So, yeah, that memory was brutal, about my mother shaming me for what I wrote and then reading it out loud. It's just on so many levels.
Yeah.
And my dad not doing anything.
Well, I was curious about that dynamic, because we can, when we focus on these kind of experiences, a lot of times we focus on obviously, it's important, the person who is perpetuating abuse. And then again, there's also another parent a lot of times. And you talk about how it hurt to have your dad not stand up for you. And I'm curious about that dynamic of
it was
that part of your family life.
Really interesting, because my dad was not like my mother. He was traveling when my mother was doing all that. But my dad, I remember, on the weekends, my mother didn't have a relationship with my dad's mother. I never saw them really interact, but my dad used to take us to see our grandmother, his mother, in San Francisco on the weekends, and my mother would never go. And sometimes he'd take us to the zoo afterwards. Sometimes he'd take us ice skating afterwards. He'd be the one that cooked us Jiffy Pop on the stove when we watched The Wizard of Oz. My mom didn't do any of that. My dad would come home after traveling all week and actually take us miniature golfing. And so I had my dad as a hero, because he did listen. And, I read a story to him, like for a report. And I remember he'd help me with it. We'd play games. So he was good in that way. But when it came to, he was not around when our mom was abusing us. So my mother would especially when I was a teenager, keep at me until I swore, because the only time I would get grounded, I finally just let it loose and I would do the F-bomb, F you, to my mom. And she goes, just wait till your dad comes home. She'd run into the door when he came home, and I'd get grounded because I'm not supposed to swear at my mom, but she'd do it. I couldn't help myself. It was so cruel that I finally said, I don't care if I get punished, I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
It was awful, but
yeah.
It was a love relationship with my dad, but he didn't fully protect either,
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that, as I have worked with families, as I worked with children over the years, it was some of my starting out, my career. And so periodically, but as I worked with a therapist with children, it's not uncommon that I'll run into that, where people will say, can you believe what they did? And it's like, well, let's back the story up a little and try to put some context around what they did, and not that every behavior is okay just because you're a kid, whatever. But there's a lot of times where the behavior fits very nicely into something that as an adult, you wouldn't put up with being treated the way that the child's being treated, but yet you expect them to without misbehaving. In fact, I've even had people that have said, I took a video of them having a tantrum and they said, do you want to see it? And my typical response has always been, not really. I know what a tantrum looks like. Was anyone videoing you before the tantrum started? Because that would probably help me more. And that's not always received super well, but no, but when someone is making an effort, they'll say, "Oh, let's talk about that," But a lot of times, that's the problem: is we tell the story as if it starts with, "Well, the kid threw a thing," or "The kid told me to fuck off," and it's like, okay, that's probably not the beginning of the story.
Right.
But a lot of times, adults are conditioned to say, "Oh my," to say that to your parent.
Yeah.
And so there is often a loneliness there because particularly if you can't even turn to who you looked at as a protector to protect you. Right.
Yeah. And my dad died 10 years after my mom. And I will say that 10 years, like he'd come over to dinner once a week. I worked out so much with my dad and really mature. I got to see him date other women. He showed a different side of himself. I mean, he got married. I mean, they were 18 or 19 when they got married. So my father, the 10 years where I saw him be in healthy relationships, I had really deep conversations with him. And, he, on his deathbed, I was just so present with him and he was communicating, with one eye open. And I felt, like I said, we said everything we needed to say to each other. And that was a really beautiful thing where he apologized because I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was that bad.
So as you've gone through, I'm curious about some of the roles of some of the healing things that you mentioned. I'm really intrigued by the concept you bring up from childhood of magic, and it seemed to evolve into more spirituality and just the things that meant to you. And I wonder if you can share a little bit with that with people.
Oh yeah, that's really important. The first memory I had of magic, I was, Jewish, and I remember it was a Passover dinner. I think I was only about 2, and we were finding, all the little girls were tasked with finding the matzah. And I was kind of scared. And I remember my older sister and the third one, they went running off together to find it. And I was just by myself and I got frightened because I didn't know where to look or what to do. I'd never had that game before of looking for something. And all of a sudden, I started to buzz from head to toe. And that buzzing made me look up and it's like I looked at everything really carefully. The dining room, the drawer was ajar slightly. And I knew that the matzah would be there. And I ran to it and I went on my tippy toes because I saw a little napkin and I pulled and I said, I call that magic. I had many instances of that, like if I'm struggling in school, what to write or what to do, that I would have a dream about it in the middle of the night or an instantaneous like download. And it would fill me with so much energy that I couldn't help but manifest it. And I still have that. I don't know when it's going to happen. I just know that when I get that sort of palpable feeling in my body that somebody, spirit magic, is directing me, and I completely lock into it to the point where it's amazing. I mean, it's really, I've had many magic things happen in my life.
How did that add to, or how was that involved in how it made you feel about your life, especially about these hard times?
When here I was getting A's in school, which took studying, but whenever I had to do something that was bigger than the studies, bigger than the book, like it was a cosmic idea, whether it was work or something I was writing about, it would be like a download. And one time I remember going to work, I was at a pretty big company, and went to my boss early in the morning after having kind of one of those downloads. And I said, oh my gosh, I figure out how we're going to solve that problem. We need to make this product. And he goes, you go into that office over there and you write everything down right now. Don't come out of that. And it ended up being a really huge product.
Huh.
I don't know how it came into me. It just did. It doesn't happen every day, but it's happened. And like my grandmother, before she died, she came to me and said, Lena, come here. And I went and saw her in the, like 6 a.m. at the assisted living center, which I had never done before. And she was like on her bed, kind of taking these short breaths with a furrowed brow. And I just said, I heard you, Nana. I love you. And I rubbed her little furrowed brow, and she died right there at 99. And she still comes to me in dreams and says one sentence, and it's usually a really profound sentence. So there's something magical or spiritual up there that I attune to. Sometimes I think it's one of my theories is that by falling through the window, and I have a lapse of memory between like grabbing like something that I probably had a near-death experience, and I had a sensation of what it was like to be on the other side that made an imprint on me. That's kind of how I think about it. And then I came back. I don't know. It's just
no. I mean, no way to know for sure. Obviously, I guess, but it's not really about. I think what you're describing really isn't about knowing for sure anything. You're talking about. I think there's an investment we put into faith, whatever that faith represents to us, right?
And attuning to it.
Yeah. And we say, well, what does this do and where? And from my perspective, I always think the healthiest or the way to determine how, if we want to say true, if we want to say healthy, good, however, is where it takes us. And it sounds like it not only has taken you ways that are very practically and emotionally helpful. I mean, to me, it sounds like it's been one of the joys in your life too.
Yeah. And even, I don't know about you, but I feel like we're in these weird upside down times where everything is just crazy. I have never felt, and this is not like Pollyanna, it's like I have never felt more right side up, because I feel like I'm very present, and my mantra is be what's needed. How can I best serve the moment? And I want to serve it as a blessing, not as a curse. And when I walk in the world that way, so many things happen that, I feel like I have this opportunity to be a blessing instead of a curse. And I may forget what I had, I'm getting older, so I may forget what I ate for breakfast. But if I stay in the moment, it seems like it's always true. Doesn't mean the moment's quote unquote good or bad. It just means that I could actually be what's needed here in a moment, and everyone can too. And then you have a world that's operating in a different way than people are just running around, Mm-hmm. I think I need to punch you right now in the moment, So be a blessing. That's my motto now, be a blessing, hug a grandbaby.
And an important part of the message. And well, for everybody, the book is Shattering the Mirror, and I want everyone to know best places they can find that and where they can follow your work.
Yeah, so Shattering the Mirror is the title of the book. It's a metaphor for a lot of things. The website is shatteringthemirror.com, and you can buy the book in paperback, Kindle, and Audible on Amazon, BookBaby, Barnes and Noble, things like that. So it's readily available.
Right. Is there a place where people should follow you and your work to see where things are going? What's the best landing spot for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably just to check in with my website, shatteringthemirror.com.
Right.
That's where I put all the podcast links and the article links or what's new coming out. So
great. Well, for everybody out there that's listening, I definitely recommend the book. I think you should go. I think you should get it, and it has just powerful messages about going through and moving through these things. I want to make a quick plug for everybody of our focus. As we're going through the month, we're focusing this month on the charitable organization Kids and Art, which is a California-based organization, although they reach out all over the place. You can go to kidsandart.com as one word, and they help those with pediatric cancer. So they help children and families going through cancer treatments through art education, and art activities. That's the one we've been focused a lot on different. We've had some authors and some filmmakers on this last month and these last 2 months particularly, and so it ties in very much with the way that art influences healing. So, Lena,
That's amazing. Thank you.
that's a great group. Yeah, I was able to
Kids and
find
Art.
them, and they do a lot of good work for a really good cause. But Lena, thank you so much for being here with me today and for the work that you're doing.
And thank you for the work you're doing. I really appreciate it.